In this video, I'm just going to discuss firmware updates for the Panasonic GH6 and kind of the lack of them, I guess, at the moment. And, it's got to the point where people are kind of asking if it's come to the end of its life or if it's going to get any more firmware updates. But, I mean, if we're kind of realistic about it here, we've got the GH6 here on the firmware update page. So this video would 21st of May when I'm recording it. So we had a firmware update basically 5 months ago, more or less. And, that's not really that long ago in sort of comparison when you think we waited nearly 9 months for firmware version 2.3 by comparison. And, the G9 Mark II, which is essentially a brand new camera, that only got a firmware update at the end of January. And of course, that's not been abandoned. So, I think it's kind of, I think, obviously a lot of the videos are just kind of like clickbait anyway, and just to kind of get people talking. But I mean, in all reality, there has been a firmware update not that long ago. And, Lumix are great at giving firmware updates, but it's not as if they kind of do one a month, because obviously the firmware updates require a massive amount of testing, and they've got to be really stable before releasing them. So, one thing they actually do really well is that they do stable releases for cameras. It's very rare any firmware updates ever have to be like immediately patched or rolled back or anything like that. I mean, there are always little kind of bug fixes in each release. There's there's always going to be bits like that, but never anything kind of too catastrophic. So I'm not saying the cameras are perfect. They're obviously not. There are plenty of bugs between like a lot of the newer cameras, which there are bugs in the GH6 that still haven't been resolved. The camera's been out over 2 years and there's still quite a few little bugs in it that just never got fixed. And some of them got carried over into the G9 Mark II. Some of them exist in the full frame line. They're just kind of there, and I'm sure they will get fixed eventually, but they're obviously not a priority at the moment. And, I'm not defending Lumix for kind of all of their decisions, because I feel like they've made some pretty bad ones, like certainly recently into kind of, what goes into which cameras, where the kind of support is for some of the cameras. It's been a little bit all over the place, but you sort of, when you buy the camera, whatever you buy, whichever one it is, you have to just always expect that those features that it's billed as when it's released, they're the features that you're buying it for. They're not going to suddenly just release new headline features that make the camera 10 times better. And, they have done things like that with some of the cameras, where they have added things that have made them, they've really increased the value of the cameras, and they've made them a lot more feature rich. But it's a bit unrealistic to just sort of expect them to start releasing things that make the top line features on the camera higher. I mean, a good example of that is kind of, the GH5 had a really strange mismatch on the kind of, some of the frame rates. So, 4K 60 was always 8-bit. It would have been great if it had got 4K 60 10-bit, but that wasn't something for firmware. That got rolled into the GH5 Mark II. And, they need to save things for kind of the next iterations of the cameras, So I think in reality, unless Lumix have specifically said they're going to add a feature after launch, and, that has happened. There have been things like generally things like external recording over Atmos recorders, or the Blackmagic Video Assist. There have been cases like that where they've sort of said, it's come in, but they've got third parties to work with, and they have to iron that kind of stuff out before it all goes live. So I mean, if we take a look at some of the firmware releases, even the GH6, we'll take a quick look at this, and we can kind of see if we just jump. Sorry, let's just jump out of that. Here we go. So we've got some of the older changelog here. So, the camera gets released, and then shortly after, you generally get some bug fixes, which, you know, they always kind of come along like that. And then, like I say, there's quite often the kind of third-party devices get support then. So, you know, we've got raw video over HDMI. Again, third-party things. We've got the Atomos Ninja. We've got Blackmagic Video Assist. That didn't actually come at the same time on this one, but, you know, for other cameras in the future, it probably will every time. DJI products, you know, again, external products. And this sort of came, you know, a couple of months after that. But then from then, the updates, you know, they start to kind of fall off because they're not going to be doing sort of huge updates every time. And again, it's the same for, you know, the G9 Mark II. You can kind of look at this. This has had a slightly easier firmware update history to follow. You know, it's got the initial one. Again, you've got those external options for recording, and then some stability fixes and bug fixes that always kind of come out. And then, you know, the next one in January really was just this for you know, a couple of little fixes. There's nothing really kind of too special there. It's not a kind of firmware update that is a very desirable one. I mean, the S series cameras, yeah, they just got a really good update. You know, we can have a look at actually it's probably better to look at the S5 Mark II. So, you know, you can see like the changelog for this. Again, we've got some, you know, basic fixes there when it was launched. Again, you've got your external, you know, external video things, couple of bug fixes and additional features. And it sort of just goes on like that. You know, you've got, there were quite a few updates that sort of all came out with this one in a row, because it was almost a bit of a, you know, I mean, it was the first camera with phase detect and almost a little bit of a first kind of generation of that style of mirrorless camera. So, you know, it was the full frame that was slightly different to some of the others. You know, it wasn't built on top of the others. So, you know, there were a lot of bits that they probably had to come back and fix, and then they added functionality sort of as it went as well. So, and you've got the S5 Mark II X as well sat alongside it, so there's probably a little bit of crossover where they've had to kind of cross-fix things, but you can kind of see, you know, we're looking a lot at kind of bug fixes. And then there was this really nice update recently where they got all these additional things like these new AF features, the pre-burst, proxy recording, improved stabilization, frame IO support. And that's sort of where I guess it sits with like the GH6 now. It's just kind of like, will it get any of those things? And, you know, you've got to kind of bear in mind that the full frame line is now becoming the bread and butter now really for Panasonic. You know, the S line or the S series doing really well. They're just about to release a new S series camera. It'll actually be the day after this has been recorded, so it'll probably be out by the time you listen to this. So, you know, a lot of focus is there in the full frame line, but they've not given up on Micro Four Thirds. You know, they've got the G9 Mark II. They've, you know, not too long ago they were releasing a couple of lenses like the kind of 9mm Leica. There is stuff kind of in the pipeline for MFT, but, you know, I think it just sits a lot further down the pecking order. And you can kind of see, you know, at least not yet, that the G9 Mark II hasn't had those kind of updates that the S5 had. So, you know, the AF features were ported from that camera, so, you know, and pre-burst as well. So, you know, they don't need to be added, but you've got things like proxy recording, frame IO, and, you know, I think the likelihood is that they'll probably push in a few patches, and then maybe there'll be, you know, an update with some of that stuff. But then the trickle down to the GH6 is, you know, that's where I'm not really sure where that ends, because the thing is you've got that kind of one of the main things that the GH6 doesn't have that the other cameras have is the real-time LUT. And that is actually baked into a lot of those other features. You know, real-time LUT works with the proxy modes, and even to an extent with the frame IO integration. So it's one of those things that if it's not going to have that, then, you know, they might not be able to build those other things on top of it. I mean, my guess is, you know, none of the AF features will come to the GH6 because they're all PDAF based things, I think. You know, so I don't think we'll see any of that on, you know, the DFD system. We likely won't see the pre-burst feature because we didn't get live view composite on the GH6. They sort of aimed it more at video, so we missed out on a lot of those kind of photography features. But you would hope, you know, on that kind of on the basis that they could potentially get real-time LUT in there, that we might actually see the new proxy recording feature and potentially that Frame IO integration. But as I say, you know, it seems quite entwined into real-time LUT. So at this point, you know, who knows? Maybe that is something for the GH6 Mark II or the GH7 or whatever it becomes. I mean, there are some nice little features that, you know, people don't even talk about that have been added into the new S series cameras, or you know, even into the G9 Mark II, where they've got little things like filtering options just for video that you don't even have on you know, on the GH6 and some of the older cameras. So even bringing that forward would be really nice. It's just basic functionality that just makes workflow so much quicker. And, you know, I think the next firmware update for the GH6 is probably going to be quite telling as to what the camera is actually capable of. I mean, I wouldn't be expecting the world, but at the same time, you know, it's not the last firmware. That's not going to be the last firmware for the GH6. I'm almost 100% certain of that. So, but yeah, I'd be interested to know, you know, what other people think, and yeah, if you've got any sort of opinions on it, drop them in the comments, and yeah, that's it really.